today. We've got Carolina with the United States Census Bureau is going to be teaching us all about the history of the census and the impacts of the census. So I think we're really in for expanding our knowledge about the census today. Before we start, I just want to tell you all a little bit about New Knowledge Adventures. I don't know if this is the first class for some of you or the first of many classes that you all have taken on for New Knowledge Adventures, but it really is a program that started almost 20 years ago. It's a volunteer-run organization. Volunteers came up with the idea at Idaho State University in Pocatello, and then they expanded it to Idaho Falls. And then 5 years ago, actually, to this month, we started it here in Treasure Valley. And so, and then with COVID coming, we've had to really pivot and bring all the classes to this online forum through Zoom. And we really thank our volunteers for being able to bring that to life for everybody. And just to continue to expand our knowledge and hopefully stay mentally sharp and not feel so isolated during COVID. As we start this session today, we have a couple of ground rules that we want you to know about when we do this. That if you want to leave the class or need to leave the class, you can do that at any time. It's up to you if you want to show your video, even though we love seeing people's faces, helps us feel connected. We will be muting all the microphones. And so if you have a question, please ask it in chat. To see chat, you see the little chat. If you scroll on your screen and go down, you'll see different buttons illuminated, and you'll see the chat button. And so you can ask any questions in there. And then I will be, Carolina, when it seems like appropriate time, I will be letting you know that there would be a question in chat. And then also, please, only professional language to be used also in the chat button, or if you are going to ask a question online live, please, professional behavior only. If you have any questions of me, again, you can ask in the chat box. My name is Kathy McDougall. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and start the class. We've got Carolina with the United States Census Bureau. Carolina, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, and then you have the floor. Let's see, Carolina, we've lost your video. But I know we'll get you back. Let's see. Let's see. There we go. And Carolyn, you're muted. Let's see, I'll ask to unmute you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Great, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Carolina Valderrama. I'm with the US Census Bureau. It's been a nice, interesting 2 years of working with the census. It started out in 2018 with just myself in the state. And then slowly we had other partnership specialists join in. And given our kind of unprecedented universal, pandemic, we had a shift around a lot of things. So that made outreach very interesting. And so I'm very happy that I'm here to kind of give you a little bit of a road of 2020. And the census is still not over. So if you can continue to encourage those voices and those folks to help get the word across for folks that we have until September 30th to continue entering that data. And think of it as essentially the Census Bureau is basically the business plan for the state for the next 10 years. So that's what funds the roads, the schools, and we know the schools need a lot of money. Computer technology definitely in the wake of COVID has given us a lot of information, a lot of insight as far as things that we need and where we can do better. And that's where the census data will come in to kind of help elevate those funds for the individual states. So let me here share my screen. Okay, stop that. All right, So you should be able to see my screen here. Is that good?
Yeah, we can see it. That looks really good.
All right. Okay, so for today, basically some kind of key points that we're going to cover. History, the importance, the process, some of the surveys. So it's not just the decennial. There are a couple of other surveys that are out there, and they happen concurrently to the census. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes we get folks that are like, well, I just did a survey. So it's always good to kind of keep in mind that there are always a variety of census products out there. And then last but not least, one of the programs that the census does is statistics in schools. So if you look in the census webpage, there's a lot of little things on there. Most recently, they've made things that are called like data gems. So you can take a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening in the community as far as like renters and things like that. And you may have heard of a survey that the Census Bureau was doing as far as understanding the COVID outbreak and pandemic in the United States. So why do we do a census? Well, it is actually a mandate of the Constitution to enumerate everybody in the United States. And the key purpose is apportionment for the U.S. House of Representatives. Will the state of Idaho get an extra person for the House of Reps? We don't know. It just kind of depends. We might be maybe 1 or 2 censuses away from that. Right now we have 2. So that's where the purpose of that happens. As far as like the Constitution, I've done presentations before where folks have said, well, the population changes so dramatically. Why do you have to wait 10 years? Why can't you just do it, every 5 years? Well, you'd have to literally change the Constitution to change the date of when the census takes place. So that's kind of the straightforward question as to why the census, the decennial, takes place every 10 years. So here's a little bit of kind of a snapshot of the decennial population. And you can see like the first one got started in 1790. So we've been doing this every 10 years. And you would think that a lot of people would kind of remember or think about this. Personally, in 2010, I don't remember much efforts being done in Boise. So that was kind of interesting when I came on board to the Census Bureau. It made me think about what efforts were done, if any, in 2010 for partnership staff. And so then you can see that every 1790 it was just head of household. That's who was counted. And then from there you kind of see that 1870 they started counting Native Americans. Before that they never counted Native Americans. It was just kind of a, who are these people? We don't have to worry about them. 1880 Blacks were first counted, and then women worked as enumerators, and then there was a count by machine. So they would tally up the test, like the scores pretty much of the census count in the machine. So it's really interesting to see Native Americans, Blacks, and women being involved rather almost 100 years later from the census. Here we have the 1920s, the first time over 100 million folks. And then there's the baby boomers right there, 1940. So as you can see the trajectory, the population steadily going up. And it's really nice because right now, if you guys are into any sort of genealogy, any sort of studies as far as your family, a lot of the records of 1940s are being released because the information gets released every 70 years, 72 years to be exact. So that's when, if you're interested in the genealogy, and I like to do a lot of studies in that, then you're able to kind of see, oh, they're releasing some information. Well, that's the reason why they're releasing the information is because that it has gone past the 72-year mark. So that's new data being taken out. Then we have the 2010 is the fourth amendment challenge, and then the 2020 we won't know what the population total is, but I'm very interested to see where we're at. Currently in Idaho, we are almost 100% counted. So 99% of the households, so every single house that has been built, constructed, and or someone has been living in has been counted. And out of that 100% tally, 68.9% of people have gone online themselves to be counted. And there's about 30% that had to be encouraged to be counted by having an enumerator go to their door. And then the rest have been, they're still being counted as we speak right now. Like enumerators are still going out and finishing up that portion.
Carolina,
So,
this is Kathy. Can I ask it? There's a question in the chat. It says, is the 72 years also a Constitution mandate? And where did that time frame come from?
Right. Well, the idea behind that is, in long story short, is to protect the identification of folks. So the census is supposed to be very confidential. Nobody's supposed to know who you are, where you live, and be able to deduce from, based on data, to triangulate like who you are as a person. So the data is supposed to remain confidential, and the logic behind that is that if there is any bad blood between anybody, 72 years is a rather long time, and you're not going to really be able to, grab that person or, identify them. And that's pretty much, long story short, it's right there, is that information is just supposed to be kept confidential. So every single census employee, down to like the enumerators, down to a recruiter just recruiting folks to come and be an enumerator, we are all sworn by a notary public that we will not release any information. In addition, we could be fined up to $250,000 and or imprisoned up to 5 years. So my job specifically, and Jane's job, was partnership development. Our job's not really too sensitive as far as information goes, but enumerators, think about it, they are asking people very personal questions. How many people live in your household? What is the race and ethnicity of the folks in your household? So that information in itself needs to be kept protected, not only because of like political systems and, but also societal systems and things like that. We can all kind of look back and remember the redlining that happened in certain neighborhoods that were Black. So you can definitely see and understand why the 72-year mark is kind of a really good standard protocol to protect the information and the data. Does that answer the question kind of in a long story? Any other questions on that? Okay. All right. So significant events in census history. Jane has on here, in 1790, she always likes to talk about this, like literally the US Marshals would go out, deputized citizens, and they would go on horseback. They literally go to all the households on horses, but it was the US Marshals, and you can think about like how intimidating this may have been at that time. You have a US Marshal, someone that's like in a police capacity, coming to you to count your households, right? So it's definitely gave that element of it's a mandatory thing to do. And then in 1850, you have issues like taxation, crime, things like that were, people were kind of worried, like, wait, is this information going to affect me? And then obviously undercounting has been a thing since 1870, New York and Pennsylvania. So you can see that a lot of these trends are somewhat similar. Who do we count? How do we count them? Is it going to affect me? And then just who is doing the counting in my household? So 1941, they removed the confidentiality piece. So they were trying to be very clear and transparent. What ended up happening with the census was they were thinking that, let's remove the confidentiality piece because we have this concern of people that might be nefarious. But what ended up happening was that created a really big, even bigger problem than wondering who is being counted, who is here. Unfortunately, as a result of the confidentiality piece being removed, a lot of the Japanese were interned. So they were put into these, you can call them concentration camps, you can call them relocation camps, you can call them working camps. Regardless of what they are, they were relocated away from their homes and not giving much opportunity to either preserve their housing or their finances. And so it was basically a giant mess. And so that's the confidentiality piece was removed. And that was very unfortunate to a specific population in the United States. Very quickly, it was discovered that that was not something that should be done again. So by 1947, that was restored. So obviously the 1950 census has that confidentiality piece on there, but that 1941 removed the confidentiality and caused another side effect of removing that piece. So it's very important to maintain that. So that's something that the Census Bureau recognizes was a fault and recognizes that it's even more so very important to maintain this confidentiality piece. And thus all census staff are sworn in to protect the information of individuals. And so then we go down at the bottom, there's several cases, court cases. I'm not very familiar with these, but if you're interested in understanding a little bit more of like what folks are thinking or talking about as far as an undercount, you can look up Young versus Klutznick for the city of Detroit, or Cuomo versus Baldridge in New York City. And so then those are just kind of, can give you kind of a snapshot, a little bit of an idea of what issues they were facing, what they were thinking, what they were worried about as far as an undercount goes for Detroit and New York City. This is essentially our 2020 Decennial Census motto. Count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And the reason that the census does the count and asks, where were you April 1st, is because of this. Because they want to count everyone once and only once and in the right place. And if you think about where people were on April 1st, let's say that that you're a snowbird and you like to go travel places. Well, April 1st captures where you were and gets that money to that corresponding state. College students are also counted in the state that they go to college at, not necessarily where they live, but the state where they're at going to college. And the logic there is they're utilizing resources in that state, such as the roads, so travel, transportation. Roads need to be maintained, and that's maintained by the statistics of people that are traveling, that are moving up and down, in the state, within the state, going to their corresponding places. So it's very important that each state has a correct and accurate count of folks. And this brings up like a lot of questions oftentimes, because it's like, well, what about if we weren't anywhere on April 1st, or we were out of town April 1st? Well, you got to count yourself. Where would you have been? So let's say if you were traveling, vacation, seeing family, then where would you have normally been on April 1st? So that's the key point right there. So count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. So this is like the big one. This was something that was always very important for us when we were doing presentations for the city of Boise. I presented to the governor's office, and so basically, why does it even matter? Why do we even do the census? Well, So obviously we covered the power, the congressional representation, and the reapportionment and redistricting. And that's information heads over to the president December 31st, and then those redistricting things happen so that it's taken care of for the next following year. So we won't know redistricting or what that looks like until probably 2021. In Idaho specifically, and each state's different. So there's $675 billion distributed for the whole United States, but funding for each specific state is based on that distributed population. So for Idaho, it was 2.4 billion, and then each one of you counted $1,473 for each of the 10 years. So each person is, and this was based on a study that was done out of George Washington University, utilizing census data and kind of coming up with like a nice little number to give it a more of a personalized meaning as to what the impact was of an undercount. So for Idaho, we have 1.7 million people estimated, and it should be a little bit higher than that. I'm wondering if it's going to be 2 million. Well, if you were to multiply that 1,473 over the whole entire population of the state of Idaho, you can see why it would be very important for just the state in general to have a complete count as much as possible. Any questions on that? Okay. So here we have a little bit of a kind of a 2010 panorama of the representative changes in the whole U.S. So you can see Texas, because it's nice, bright and blue right there. It gained, from 2000 to 2010, it gained 4 seats in the House. And as you can see, Idaho has 2. Well, we're hoping that, you know, obviously we're not going to lose anyone, but California does stand to lose this time around if the count is undercounted. So if folks there are undercounted, there's a chance they could lose someone. But obviously from 2000 to 2010, there is no change at all whatsoever for them. So you could see why each of the states would be kind of interested in, you know, maintaining that count. And you can look at New York. So if you look at the, you know, the potentiality of losing 2 seats between 2000 and 2010, right? So when their count in 2010 came around, they would have been very excited to hit the streets, get everybody counted. We don't want to lose any more seats because we want our representation. And oftentimes that representation is kind of what makes the difference for the U.S. House of Representatives.
Carolina, I have a question. So
yeah.
When a state loses or gains a seat, like then what happens to the congressional districts? Are they redrawn, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so based on the numbers and the data, they are redrawn. So, okay. And it's all based on population, and a ton of formulas go into it. So one of them one formula kind of like for a thing that I'm kind of more familiar with, because you guys, it's insane, like the amount of data that goes into and like the formulas that they have to understand that is way above my pay grade. I would need a PhD in statistics. But one easy one that we worked with a lot was the tract level. So you guys have all probably heard about a tract, census tracts, right? So census tracts are taken down to as close as possible down to geographic boundaries. You can even see like roads and things like that, but they devise it in such a way that a tract can only have 4,000 people in it, because they figured out the formula. If you have less than 4,000 people, you can do like a reverse analysis of the data and find out how many of a specific race there are in that specific tract. So statisticians have come up with this magic formula that says like the census information will only go down to the census tract of about 4,000 people. And so then that's what makes a tract. So if you were to look on, there's like a whole bunch of different websites, and you can look at Owyhee County. Owyhee County has like about 4 tracts in it, and one of them is super huge. Well, the reason behind that is because that's where there's 4,000 people living in it. There's a tinier tract that's kind of the south of Marsing in Owyhee County, and it's rather small. Well, it's because it's a denser area population. So it's using these tracts and other factors, they make a larger kind of redistricting area, and they figure out how they can, divide states into areas to redistrict, and then based on those population, then they're able to decide, okay, there's enough people, and then here's the formula, and then this is why we need an extra U.S. House of Reps. So that's the simplest way I can explain it. Questions on that? Okay. So what's at stake? Remember that 1,473? That's each one kind of goes, think of it as going into a bucket. So each one of these programs right here accept funds to help the population in the state. So the Head Start program gets 41.2 million, and the National School Lunch Program gets 54 million. So here are some examples of why the count is important, because if we do have an undercount, that means less money for these programs. And one insightful thing I found out was, if you see, like, for example, road programs or street programs, like towards the tail, and you're noticing that they're kind of stopping, generally it's because they're waiting for the next decennial to get funds to do the roads or fix something. So they're waiting for that new bunch of money that's coming in to help and redo the different areas. Okay. Well, let me see. Is that it? Why am I stuck on that? I apologize for that. So here's the ability to self-response. Started in March 12, 2020, and it went on for a while. It got extended. That was right during our middle of our COVID situation, so we extended it. Originally, we had thought about having the census run into October, and that's what we had talked to a lot of folks in our respective areas in the state. And it was very sad to find out that Congress hadn't acted fast enough for us to be able to get the okay from them to extend the census until October 30th. So you may have heard people just kind of, or news articles saying, oh my gosh, the census cut it short by, a whole month to September 30th. Well, that's not necessarily the case. We were set to close on July 30th. And so then we had requested October 30th just to give us enough time to process data and talk with folks. But unfortunately, Congress couldn't figure out how to get that expedited, that process expedited. And so then we had to revert back to our plan B, which was already secured and okay, which was a month out after our July 30th pandemic. But understand that given that this time around we had the online feature, it's very easily, a lot of those folks could have been, captured already in that online format. So that was kind of what happened with those discussions around, like, oh my gosh, the census is being closed early, etc. So internet, phone, paper form, in person are all the ways that we do the census, and 13 languages, including English, were supported as well. Here's some things that we ask, pretty basic: address, phone number, the count of each person at your address, and this includes folks that might be couch surfing or roommates or extended family. Like you need to definitely count all of them at that address. And then for identification for your race, one of the neat features about that is that statisticians look at a trend. They look at trends of how people answer and respond. So in 2010, a lot of people put down American as an identity, or they were wanting to put down like I'm German, Irish. So then for this time around, because usually when you do the census, there's some different selections that you can make, and then they have an other category. So you can put whatever you want to identify as under that. So statisticians look at the top kind of 5 of those, and then they keep adding them. And so what they noticed this time around was, for example, a lot of different, there was like a lot of refugees that were coming into the US between 2010 and now. So they put in another option in there that you can actually self-identify if you're Black or Native or African American or a different type of, origin. So you can add onto that. And then obviously the relationship of the folks in there. So they ask who's, if you have a daughter. So I did mine and I put in my daughter on there and added the relationship. So then they're able to kind of understand a little bit more of the population. Here's the languages. The internet self-respond is in all those languages. And it's interesting that in Idaho, well, Boise specifically, we have about 80 languages spoken within the refugee community. And I'm looking at these, there's maybe like 3 languages that I can see off the top that are the top languages would be English, Spanish, and Russian. I don't see a lot of other of these languages spoken. The paper form only has 2 languages, and then the help form 13. And then the enumerators obviously are limited to those 2, that bilingual English, Spanish. And then the language cards are 59 languages. And then there's also Braille in American Sign Language. We did have a couple of folks wondering how folks were going to get enumerated if they were visually impaired. And this was a really neat, for me, I like to kind of understand how the inclusion piece fits in with things. So it was nice to see that they do have a Braille language card so that folks can respond that way. So again, reiterating this confidentiality piece, which is so important for the census, especially after the 1940s situation that happened. No information can be released, right? There's nothing that's identifiable, not even to law enforcement agencies or anything like that. There was a case in the 1990s, and I'm trying to find it and dig into it, but I guess the office in Denver had been looking, the FBI office had been looking for a specific guy who was a serial killer. And they went to the Census Bureau's office because they knew, hey, you guys might have this information for this guy, and we definitely need to capture him. Well, the Census Bureau would not allow the FBI into the building, and they weren't able to get that information, even though it was important. For the capture of this individual, they weren't allowed in. Well, that's because that's that Title 44 that provides, that protects the information. And you're only able to see it again after 72 years. And then right at the bottom, again, talks about those penalties for census staff. And so we take the oath, even after I leave the Census Bureau. I'm basically sworn in for life. I cannot release any information. But again, our job as partnership staff, we didn't come across individual names. We just worked with businesses and our partners in our community, which is already public information. So this doesn't really apply too much for us per se, because I'm not working with, say, Kathy's information. I don't know who's all in her household. So I'm not necessarily up to that piece. And then we have the hard to count population. So we have racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ, people experiencing homelessness, all of these different folks are categories that the Census Bureau identifies as target populations that we need to have a specific message for. So, because given on like the data that the Census Bureau has looked at, they have identified these are kind of like the pockets of folks that get undercounted a lot of the times. The one I like to highlight is the children under 5, because sometimes if you have like a brand new born and you're a mom or whatever, you're doing the census, it says how many people are in the household. I've talked with a couple of moms that are like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to count the baby because I'm reading this and it says how many people, and you've just had a baby. And if it's your first one, you'll tend to kind of forget or include them in that census survey. But what ends up happening is if we don't count those kids under 5, they're going to be going through their first primary years in that first decennial. And so then you're missing out, funds for the schools as far as like those free lunches, books, teachers, staff, representation of the teachers to at least say, oh, in this area, we have a lot of Latinos, so maybe we should hire a bilingual teacher. So things like that can affect a whole bunch of other things. Rural communities, right? My friend Dora worked in, she used to live in Nissa, Oregon, and her mom was a enumerator for I think it was the 2000 census. And Dora told me a story, and I don't know if, I know that the hospital moved, but I'm not sure what the reasons were. But Dora thinks that it was because there was a severe undercount in 2000. And the hospital ended up moving to Ontario, Oregon, which was about 2 hours away from Nissa. And I was talking with Dora, and she was saying that she suspects it's because of the severe undercount. The hospital couldn't justify staying in one small rural town. And so they moved up to the next more or less metropolitan location in that Eastern Oregon area. So there's a lot to lose if we don't reach the rural communities and explain to them why the count is so important, right? It's resources such as hospitals, their schooling, even their roads. So with all of these different organizations, what we did as partnership staff, we reached out to organizations that work with rural communities. And so then what we did was like, hey, we need your help in doing some outreach. We did things like, pairing up with the local library. They were very, very receptive. The one in Horseshoe Bend, Valley County, all different places. They were very interested in helping us achieve the count and also reaching those rural communities. So we were able to, strategically partner up with folks that had a vested interest. And with tribal members, we had a specific partnership specialist that worked with the tribes here in Idaho. And so her job was to try and understand, what messages needed to be, taken to them, what groups she needed to include them on, mostly important was identifying a point of contact at those tribal populations, those tribal members. And she was able to understand a little bit more of the social dynamics between the communities and the Census Bureau, to understand those kind of politicizing forces between the federal government and that native tribal or group. So it was really strategic. Even though these are hard to count populations that have been identified by the Census Bureau, there are also, partners, community partners, businesses, nonprofit organizations that work with these specific groups. And then paired up with us as partnership specialists, we brainstormed how to work with them together in order to reach their demographics, their population that they were serving. So that's that. Surveys have a start. Oh, other census surveys. I'm not sure why it's so tiny and small. So these are some other census surveys have a start and an end date. Some of them are weekly, some of them are monthly, and some of them take place every 4 months. So these ones, with the exception of the decennial, which is everybody, these other surveys are they're randomized samples. So not everybody in the US will get these. So don't worry, you're not gonna get 5 different surveys every month. These are randomized samples. One of the ones I like, and it's probably because I worked with a lot of social organizations and nonprofits that did a lot of grant writing. So the American Community Survey, the ACS, it's really nice because it captures people's like housing units, income, utilities, commute, transportation. This information here that's provided by this survey specifically is really interested. It's a survey that planners in cities are very interested in. So they like to understand a little bit more about their residents. Where is their, where are they renting? Where are the housing units? So if you're hearing a lot of Boise needs to have about 1,000, they need to develop 1,000 housing units a month. This is where they're getting those estimates from. But what's really neat about this one is that this one is just a one-time survey, and it replaced the long-term decennial census. I want to say 1990s, somewhere in there. So up until then, the decennial, which is the big one, every 10-year one, it used to ask a little bit more of intimate questions. It would ask, that's the one where you get a lot of folks saying, oh my gosh, the census just wants to know how many toilets I have. Well, this is where they're kind of thinking of that. It's because they would ask folks, how long do you commute? How long does it take you to drive to work? So this American Community Survey used to ask those questions. But again, statisticians recognize that the longer a survey is, and actually the longer, more than 10 questions, the longer it is, the less possibility of people responding to it. These ones are a little bit longer, and they're a little bit more in detail, but it's really nice for our cities, for our commissioners, for our mayors, even, all the way to anybody that's planning a community. This is really insightful information to understand those communities so that they are able to keep up with the infrastructure that's needed in those locations. So this survey I like to highlight. The current population survey, again, I apologize for the small font there. So the population survey is sponsored by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they estimate the labor force, the poverty statistics. This one's really, really important for the Department of Labor. This is the one where they're estimating, the data, how many people in this community are living below the poverty level. Well, they get that information through this specific survey. And this one is conducted, so when you see something that says in the field, that means essentially a person's going door to door to get that information from that specific household, because again, it's just a sample. It's not everybody, it's just a really small survey of 72,000 households. And it's also a longitudinal survey. So what that means is it's an interview that's done with the same household for over 16 months. And so then what they're looking and measuring is the differences of poverty. Have they moved out of the poverty statistics? Have they shifted? Have they, exited this financial situation? So those are kind of the things that they're looking for. And then they go around obviously with a laptop and they get the information. And again, it's all confidential because this asks very, very intimate information from folks, right? Where's your employer? Sometimes, you know, if you're poor or living in poverty conditions, that could be very embarrassing information to get out. So again, the confidentiality piece is very important for folks. Let me see, okay. So the other one is the National Health Survey. This one, again, is similar to, think of it as like the one that hospitals would be very interested in. So would like Central District Health, to understand a little bit more of the information about illnesses and health services. And like I said earlier, the census did one for the COVID-19 outbreak, just to kind of understand what was happening in different areas of the United States. The National Crime and Victimization Survey, this one's sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Department of Justice. And this one began in the 1970s. And again, it just measures the incidence of criminal victimization and crimes committed. This is very important for police departments, FBI departments, sheriffs, even for cities to understand, hey, you know, like, are we on the top, you know, top 5 for safest cities in the US? This is where they get all of those information for news articles, for blogs, to help understand, hey, Boise's pretty good, is doing pretty safe. Or, hey, you know what, LA, this area of LA is doing a little bit bad, what's happening there? So it helps to understand the detailed questions asked, you know, income and demographics. Obviously, they want to understand what's happening, who's more of a victim than not. And it just helps to understand what's going on out there. And again, it's not every single household in the US, it's just a sample size of housing units.
Hey, Carolina, this is Kathy. We have a question. So are all of these surveys happening at the same time, or are they stretched over the decade?
So they're stretched over the decade. Very good question. I know it seems like a lot, right? You're like, oh my gosh, am I going to get this at the beginning of the decennial of the decade? Well, these are all spread out, and they either happen every couple of years, they happen once or twice a year, sometimes it's once a year. So they just take place at various times. And the ACS, that one, I would say that one next to the decennial, that one's the one that gives us those estimates. So in 2010, the population of Idaho was 1.2 million, a little bit higher than that. But given the ACS and the sample size, they were able to estimate that the population is closer to 1.7 million by last year's account. So some of these surveys are they're just done at different times within the decennial. And then it gives us a snapshot, but then again, waiting for that decennial one to kind of confirm the actual population. But yes, these all take place at different times, sometimes at the same time, sometimes at different times. And right before the decennial in March came out, there was one that was going around in February. So there's various ones that are happening at various times. So just keep an eye out and just kind of spread the word to folks, because it's something that not everybody's aware of, that these are surveys that are happening, but it's surveys that provide information that's very important to actually represent what everybody's doing. One survey I've looked at kind of tells that the median rent for like Boise, for Boise was like $800. And I'm like, that's not for a studio apartment. I'm like, that's not right. It's a little higher than that. So I'm always kind of a stickler. I'm like, well, where are they getting this data?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Does that answer that question? Any other questions?
And you know that, well, it's funny about the rent statement, but yeah, I have a question. Much to my surprise, I was selected for the current population survey, and
cool.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's the closest I've ever come to winning the lottery. If there's only 72,000 people out of 300 million. But
Right?
I was wondering, yeah, is that something that they will track? Like you said, I didn't know it was longitudinal. Is that something that I should expect multiple inquiries, or is that like, how does that work?
Yeah, they may reach back out to you. That's correct.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what that follow-up survey will be. I don't know if, like, the main one, they ask you specific questions and they give you a little supplemental one to keep track. I'm not sure how that looks.
Okay.
But yeah, keep an eye out for more.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so then this one, obviously, for some of you probably glanced over this when we're reading the survey of income and program participation. Obviously, the government assistance programs. This one's very important for like the Department of Health and Welfare, and they really like this just because they want to know how many people. So, for example, how many Idahoans are on government assistance programs. And so then this is very important for politicians, for House of Representatives and the Senate here in the state of Idaho. It's very important for our governor, right, to understand, to make the case, or for even lobbying groups. So if you have lobbying groups that have specific interests in, hey, we probably need more funding, more money for Ada County Housing District, or the Ada County Housing Association, I think is what they're called, but they do a lot of the Section 8 housing, Section 42 housing, or just general information about affordable housing. And they deduce that information from this specific survey. So this one is just 30 minutes, but it can last up to 2 hours. So just be patient. Some of these surveys are a little bit longer, but this provides a lot of insightful, important information for local communities and organizations to make their case. This one's another one, consumer expenditure survey. So how are people spending their money? So if you do have a nice job, if you're in the medium income of like say 55,000, where's your money going? What are you spending? If you could remember a lot of Facebook posts or social media posts that said, hey, a lot of people are actually, they're not spending a lot of money. They're being very responsible with their, because of this whole COVID outbreak, there's not a lot of buying power right now. So this comes from this information. And this interview, again, is just 30 to 60 minutes. And I think diary. I'm not sure why Jane has diary on there. I wonder if she meant to say daily. And 90 to 100 minute quarterly interview. So that's those guys. And right now we are finishing up the service-based enumeration, but this gives you kind of a look at the variety of things that were happening with the census. So enumeration, and I know these are like funny words. Sometimes you're just like, what? So enumerations are the people that go door to door, and group quarters are, we'll go into that here in a little bit, but group quarters, transitory locations, TL, service-based enumeration, SBE, targeted non-shelter outdoor locations are called tinsel. So the census likes to use a million acronyms for things. So we'll go into that. So what is a group quarter? So a group quarter is usually where folks are not in their usual living arrangements. This could be like your homeless shelter. They could be even college dorms are considered group quarters. Hospitals are considered group quarters. Prisons as well. So this is where there's like just a group of individuals just housed together where they get some sort of services. And then we have the service-based locations, or think of it as like, what are locations that do service? So they're based on the service. So it's, you have the shelters, the soup kitchens, things like that, the mobile food vans that provide food for folks. Those are locations that are called service-based locations, and we also do enumeration here, and targeted non-shelter outdoor locations. This is the enumeration schedule. So it's already been captured for the shelters in March and the soup kitchens, and then the tinsel areas were captured on April 1st, and then all others from there through June. So individuals are being counted during SBE pretty regularly, just basically because they don't have a usual location to be at. So they're always being counted just so that we can kind of keep a tabs on, okay, here's, let's say Boise metro area has 500 folks. Well, then let's just say if we keep counting that specific population, then we can see, oh, in January there was 500, in October there's only 300. What happened? So then you're able to kind of keep, just keep tabs. I don't like to say keep tabs because it sounds kind of weird and sketchy, but it's essentially keeping like a nice image of like a snapshot of what is happening with this population. And then targeted non-shelter outdoor locations where they are seen on Census Day. They could be either like camp locations, RV locations, so not necessarily a mobile home park, but just like where they're camping. So that's where they're at, and then shelters are counted out at the shelter. We get a lot of questions about how do we count foster care folks. Well, that's also part of this service-based enumeration. You count the temporary foster care kids, where they're at, and also shared housing with families or friends are counted where they're living most of the time. People that are in transitory locations, again, like I said, the recreational vehicle parks, the campgrounds, those sorts of places, even hotels and motels. You can think about like circuses or carnivals. How do you count those guys? Well, you count them during the service-based enumeration. Usually as partnership specialists, we pair up with organizations that work with these types of, or provide services to these various groups. And then we're able to say, okay, well, where are the people that live in marinas? Like, where do there's always an organization that's working with a specific group of people. And so then we're able to partner up with them, communicate with them on the dates that we're going to do the count, and then take it from there. So that's how folks are counted. We work a lot with organizations and nonprofits to identify these targeted populations and these targeted locations. And for these questions are really simple. They're even more simple than the decennial. It's basic names, date of birth, your age on that day, your sex, Hispanic origin, race, and if they have a usual home elsewhere and what that address is. So basically, we're just trying to just capture who they are, their demographics, and given that their information is being captured via a service-based location, we already know that they're going to get counted, and that, so let's say there's no service-based enumeration areas in CUNA, but there are in Marsing, they're going to be counted in Marsing. So then Marsing is going to get the funds for to serve those populations. So that's how that goes. Due to safety, field staff, they go in pairs. It's always nice to just have a buddy with you. For safety, and then just making it a little bit more comfortable. And then that way also there's, you can kind of resolve some issues and brainstorm together. People counting in vehicles are enumerated during tinsel. So if you have folks that are living in their car, sleeping in their car, that they're getting counted that way. And again, there's organizations, nonprofits, orgs that understand where those people are, where those locations are, so they know where to go and when to go. And then we have the point in time continuum of care. That is done in the city of Boise. It's done around January. So they do the time and count for folks around the city. And then again, reiterate that everybody's protected by that Title 13 confidentiality. And then here we have the statistics in schools. This is really neat. If you have kids, grandkids, or friends that are teachers, or folks that are wondering, hey, what can I do with my child? You know, online classes are not the, some people are complaining, some of them like it, but here we have programs that are already included. It's a free program, and they teach about a variety of subjects. The lesson plans are already in place, they already exist, and then the program is revised every couple of years and updated. So this program started in 2000 for schools, and it's a really neat product of the census, using census data. Teachers, government teachers, teachers in economics, teachers in math, or just teaching social statistics or sociology or social studies, any of those things apply here. So the census, we talk about, we try and talk and reach out to teachers so that they're excited to talk about the census with their students. They're usually the ones that are kind of at the front lines of the kids, and the kids get excited about the census data. And then this is another way for us to do outreach to those parents. But essentially, the census surveys here are available for teachers to access and do any sort of like lesson plans about how to introduce kids to statistics, how to introduce them to the census. So I'd be very interested to see if this is used at all this semester for schools, for online schools. We always talk about the benefits to teachers. You have activities that were developed by teachers for teachers. We have the census hires consultants, teaching consultants to look at, hey, of all of this census data that we have, what can you come up with that would be really good for teachers? And we try and be as sincere with the material, so it's not like a random person that has no teaching experience kind of analyzing and developing these lesson plans. These are actual teachers making the curriculum, because then it translates, it communicates across for teachers themselves. So the programs can be adjusted. I've seen them going all the way down to like kindergarten, first grade level, all the way to high school, grade 12. And it's really nice for teachers to have this. I wonder myself if teachers realize that there's these handouts out there. So yes, so we have, that's a nice little program. We have, so for example, 65 activities for students in pre-K to 12, activities and resources for English language learners and adult English second language students. So we are able to capture the kiddos in school and adults that are learning the language as well. So we have here, how can schools and school boards help? Well, obviously, partner with the census at the national, local level, encourage teachers to use the program and communicate the messages of the importance through email blasts. And in March, we did Statistics in School Week. That was kind of a little bit interesting given the pandemic. It was right before. So I don't think we were as successful as we could have been this year, but given our national situation, I think it was, understandable. But again, we have material where students can take material home, and that gets the conversation going and started for folks. Well, I have reached the end of the presentation here. Since I am leaving on Friday, I'm not leaving you with my email information, but I am leaving you some information here for the Los Angeles Regional Office. So there's their address, phone number, and just a general email. So if you have any questions, also the 2020census.gov webpage has a lot of information as well. And it can come across as very overwhelming just because there's a lot of data in there. But if you have an interest, you can take a look. There's lots of materials, lots of lesson plans. There's lots of data gems that you can look. There's lots of maps that you can look at to see where your community is at, where you're standing. I can also email Kathy some links so that you guys can check out and follow and keep tabs of where Idaho is at. So far, we have surpassed 2010 census numbers. So that's great news. We're over that. And almost all the state, well, almost the whole entire state enumerated already. So very good news for us. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? You can either ask them in chat, or we can unmute you if you raise your hand.
Carolina, this is Sheena. The one question I had was when you were talking about the race that people need, you can only pick one, right? My children are mixed race, so it gets a little shaky.
No, yeah, that's a very good question, and we get that a lot. It's like, well, what can I pick? You can pick. There's a variety of different things that you can pick. You can write it in. You can select a variety, or there's also the other function. So you can put in there, you click on that, and then you can add like 2. So for myself, I'm Colombian, but I'm also, Spanish. So I was able to put Colombian and Spanish. And then you have other folks that can put in like German Irish or German Irish. And then if you're part of a Native American tribe, you can add that as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So from all of this, Carolina, it seems like somebody is working constantly on the census as opposed to what we kind of think, which is their 10-year blocks. But in order to be ready for 2030, somebody's got to start working as soon as you get your 2020 data in.
Yes, I like to hear that. Who's ready? Yeah, so right now, so little insight. So for the city, when I was working with the city of Boise to establish complete count committees, because that was our first kind of job, was, hey, go talk to people, but first of all, see about establishing complete count committees. The city of Boise, I had contacted my friend Tom there, and he took on the project. He looked at the 2010 data, and there wasn't much there. All he had was a list of people's names. And then out of everybody, there was one guy that was retiring, and he had like 2 weeks left. He was gonna be gone. So my poor friend Tom, he grabbed lunch with the guy, they talked, and there wasn't much captured from the 2010 census. So right now, what's happening with the city of Boise is that they are actually compiling some documentation, some records, some things that are kind of, good practice models, things that we should consider for 2030. So we do have individuals out there that are capturing this information, this data, what worked, what didn't work. And as far as this year, for the 2020, we had almost everybody I talked to didn't really have a lot of data from the information they captured in 2010. On our end, we have a CRM software program where we're able to keep track of people that the census worked with in the past. Some of them didn't really have anything, or a lot of the people had moved jobs, so the contact wasn't there. So definitely a lot of things can happen in 10 years. And I think it's up to us individuals to kind of keep the little flame going until 2030. And some cities, some CCCs are doing really good by capturing best practices and lessons learned so as to maintain this. But I think also it takes a lot on our part as individuals, talking with our families and friends to reiterate the importance of the decennial every 10 years, because 10 years, a lot of things can happen. We can forget about it. We go off on our daily lives. And for myself specifically, I was in college in 2010. I don't remember anything for 2010. Do you guys remember anything that happened in 2010 as far as like outreach or flyers or community stuff?
Carolina, this is Kathy. You're going to love this.
I was going to say.
I'm going to show you all what I have from 2010. Ready?
Hey!
This is my mouse pad. Isn't that something? And I did not find that on eBay. I got that at a conference.
Wow.
Really?
Thought you'd get a kick out of that. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. It's really interesting, right? Like I don't remember like hardly anything. I'm like, what was happening on campus? Yeah, even I asked some of my old professors, and I said, hey, did you guys do anything? Did the department do anything? They're like, no, I don't remember. Oh, man. Any other questions?
Yeah. So I don't see any other questions. Sheena has put a link in the chat. If you all would fill out that survey, if you just click on it right now, then you can get to it. Well, Carolina, what an informative, like really informative presentation. I've learned so much about the census and definitely gained a greater appreciation for what it does and how important it is. And also, honestly, how much work it is. So, I mean, an extraordinary amount of work to do what you all do. And I can't believe that Idaho is 99% counted. That's remarkable to me. So.
Yeah, it's really good. We're #1 in the nation, so we're kicking butt.
Yeah, that's really good news. That's good to hear, especially with the pandemic. It's amazing you can all get that much done. So that's really been informative. So, well, if there's no more questions, then on behalf of NKA, we really want to thank you. We want to wish you luck with your transition to LA. And anything else, Sheena, on your end before we end this? Looks like Sheena's muted.
I'm here. Helen, did you have a question that you wanted to ask, Helen?
I did not want to make a question, but I'd like to make a comment. I'm very impressed with what the census does. I was very uninformed of all the activities you do, and I'm very much enlightened, and I want to give many thanks for what you and everybody involved has done. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Helen. That's so sweet of you. And yes, it was kind of a super quick training, and then a lot of this I myself didn't know, right? A lot of this information I provided you guys, you probably didn't know about that either. So for myself to just be more aware of all of this that goes into place, like, wow, I was mind blown just like you are. But I really appreciate your kind words. It wasn't, at times it was not easy work to do, but it was very insightful, very enriching. And yes, I'm always a big proponent of thinking of others, and I think definitely the census encapsulates that thought. So thank you so much, Helen.
Sure. Great.
Any other questions? Okay, well then, great. Then we're going to say thank you, Carolina, and we'll end.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.
And good luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.